Alrighty, back to the shortcut. Everybody good to go? Excellent. Edit, keyword shortcuts. And I have this, you'll eventually name the set. Mine's JV, keyboard shortcuts, modified. So let me think about a really good one. I think some of the transform controls don't have, let's see, edit, transform. I think warp is one that does not have a very good hotkey. Yeah, it's like Shift Command W. So I might want that to just be, well, I guess Shift Command W is fine. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to reset things. But keyboard shortcuts, you can go to, usually I go to the panel menus because those respond to things I know of, but you can also go to just your application menus. That's what you're used to seeing on the top file edit image layer. So for instance, if I wanted to change my transform control of warp to just be the letter W. Don't do that because that's Magic Wand, but just as an example. We'd go Edit, go all the way down to Transform, and then under that you see the sub list. Go to Warp, you click on this area, type your new command. I would just type W and hit Accept. And bam, we would have that. It would give you a prompt to say, is this is a new set? You could name it, so that if somebody else wanted to use your computer, they could reset their hotkeys the way they want to. Very important. So with that done, we're going back. Base image, it's a JPEG, so it's completely flattened. I always duplicate and just save my base. I don't know why, that's what I always do. And first thing I do is check my image size. Open this up, the resolution's 72, width and height are fine, but just as a general rule, when I'm rendering, because I want to sometimes upsample and downsample things, but I don't want things to be too big, I always just reset it to something that's reasonable that I know is going to be printed. So I usually go with a width of, or a height of 11, something that's going to be able to print nicely on a tabloid sheet, 11 by 17. And overkill, but not crazy, is a 300 resolution. That's what I do. So I reset that. That's important because this image was smaller. It came out of, it was a model done in Morocco, and it was using shader light was the outboard program. Really quick outboard renderer with textures on the base, textures for the water, a little opacity on the water so you could sort of see these different areas, and then a very general light, not an actual shadow being cast. So first and most important thing that you all know is to erase the background. Millions of different ways to do that. Just show you a couple of quick little techniques. I don't know if anybody knows the background eraser tool, or if you went through that. But it's actually pretty awesome. It gives you a little arrow in the center, or a little crosshair in the center. And I need to. Tolerance has got to go up. I don't know why that's not working. Background eraser tool. Find edges. Don't know why this isn't working. Sorry. Oh, there it is. What was that?
What does find edges mean?
Find edges means that, so it looks at so does everybody know what contiguous and discontiguous is? You figure it out usually when using the Magic Wand. So find edges, it's just the way that whatever, the reason actually I wasn't erasing was because I was only selecting a white area, and it was under find edges. Well, it couldn't find any edges because it was only white. So as I get close to something that has a difference, an edge, we'll call it, the pixels are different enough that I'm being defined by the tolerance up here. That's what find edges is. Same thing with contiguous and discontiguous. It's going to analyze everything that's within the circle that you see. Everything within the circle, and it's just like a brush. You can make it larger or smaller by using the brackets, and then it erases accordingly. So this is actually a pretty awesome little guy.
So what are the steps to get it to work?
So the steps are, well, first of all, if you're under find edges, making sure that there is an edge. So it wasn't working because I was just clicking on white before. So, but now that I've established that there are edges, It's going through, and it's detecting those edges.
So you just gotta find edges, and you have tolerance of what?
I have 100% tolerance right now. So you can just play around with it, figure it out, what works best per the project. Another really good one, I don't know if most people use this, but if you're using, say, a magic wand or anything, magic wand is usually not the best for isolating or deleting things because the edges, it doesn't have a good enough consideration for the color at the edges. That's why usually selecting the image color, like usually the best thing is go select color range, and then I would select the white and delete it that way. Well, another good way to do it is if you do use the magic wand. So say I select all my white, you can go to this refine edge. So I've made a selection of the white, but the idea is that there's going to most likely be a ghosted white edge on there that's going to be annoying. So I go refine edge. It's a fabulous tool if you're ever isolated. So does anybody have a question? Okay. So it opens it up here, and I'm going to choose my way to look at it. Marching ants is what we're used to looking at. You can look at it as an overlay. What this is saying is that everything that is not selected is red. Here, everything that's not selected is black. Everything that's not selected is white. This is a good one to look at because it kind of shows you those ghosted edges. The projector is a little bit too whited out, but on my screen I can see along the ghosted edges, since it's white on white, I'm deleting white, and everything I haven't selected is white. I can see that there is a little kind of ghosted edge. So see as black. Okay, and so let's just go back to the marching ants since that's what we know. And what you can do is you can tweak in here the radius. So the radius just refers to what the computer is using to analyze that edge. So it's sending out a radius and looking at the pixels and saying, okay, I think there's an algorithm there that's calculating it differently. And so you can usually increase the radius. That makes that edge condition blurred more. It'll start to select a little bit more and get rid of more of those whites that you don't want. Smoothing, all of these adjustments work better for different applications. If it's hair, one thing's going to work better. If it's leaves, one thing's going to work better. And then an interesting one to look at is my desktop, just so everybody knows, probably the quickest way when you're working in Photoshop and most Adobe suites to make your computer run better is get stuff off of your desktop. Not even folders within folders, because your computer is literally using its RAM to always compute and make accessible all of those images and everything on your computer. So I made my selection. I'm going to delete it. Excellent. I use Command-D to deselect. Very important. And now I'm ready to start doing some more stuff. The next step we've got, I believe, would be to add a sky. I've seen so many renderings that a new sky would have really helped. It's kind of remarkable, actually. I almost always use two skies and then overlay the two and use a variety of different transparencies. So go to my entourage base. I've given you guys a bunch of skies. I'll just open up two of them, select both of them, right-click. Sorry, my computer is really lagging.
Your computer allow you to place two at once?
Well, I just open up images. Rachel and I have different techniques. A lot of people will place an image into the file that you're working, which makes a ton of sense. I always just open the image and then duplicate it over. It's just my workflow. I use duplicate all the time. So, and it gives me the option, usually when I look at like a sky, for instance, I don't necessarily want the lower edge. I don't even want to deal with it ever. So I most likely would duplicate this really quick, choose the marquee tool, and delete the bottom, just so I don't even have to bother with that. And then select that, Command-Shift-D, duplicate, and send it over to my base. It's always a good thing to name it in here, and then you're good. I close that one out. I don't need to save it. Same thing with this guy. Quickly duplicate. Use the M for the marquee. Delete out the bottom. And duplicate over. Don't need to save it. So now I've got all my skies in here. These are very high resolution, awesome skies, hence they're really big. And use my transform controls. It is of note to say at this time too, there are different modes of working. I work with show transform controls and auto select on at all times. That's up there in the upper left-hand corner. Auto select, layer, and then show transform controls is dotted. I think Rachel works without auto select on, and in that instance you have to very explicitly select your layers either by clicking them on the layer panels or right-clicking and choosing them. So I'm going to layer these.
Are there any questions at all so far?
Yeah, if I'm going too fast or slow, just tell me. So I've got my two skies in here, and going to move them to the back of the background, of course. And then we're just going to kind of play with those to make them look a little bit better. Start off by scrunching them up to the right spot. That looks pretty good. First one, drop the opacity down to, let's say, 17. Anything that really makes sense. The other sky I'm going to pull down so it covers the entire screen. And then I'm going to go through some of these blend modes just to see what they do. Soft light, doesn't do much. Hard mix, that looks awful. Vivid light, cool. That's really exciting. I always brighten the sky too. So Command B on my computer, I think that was maybe a custom one, but Command B, always brighten it. It gives so much more contrast. The reality is that most skies that we kind of experience are always lighter. It gives more depth. Anything that goes off in the distance always has that effect, that like fog sky effect. And so it's important to always address that in your renderings, which we'll talk about a little bit more in composition. What I would do is definitely those trees in the distance, kind of lighten them out eventually to give it the depth that's very important. So, okay, so my sky's in place, happy with the sky. That looks good. On to the next step is just place the various entourage stuff. So start throwing it in there. I mean, it's good to be strategic about it, but the most important thing is just get it in there so you can start working with it. So I am going to place from my folder, we've got the girl digits, the group sitting, the tourist, the guy with the phone, the kids. Let's do the trees. Let's just do everything. Open with CS5. And then just start to compose the scene, long and short of it. And we'll talk through some of these different people that I have chosen to give you because they do sort of address different elements of composition. So first of all, we've got our trees and leaves. This is a foreground piece. It's really important, this image in particular, we want to feel framed, and so this is going to hang over in the front. A lot of the times this can very well speak to the actual ecology of the area. I'm going to duplicate this over to my base. Hit OK. And close that out. We need some more kind of trees in the background to give it a reality of depth. I hate it when I look at a perspective and somebody just completely ignored the horizon line. Horizons have things on them. So these great trees, you guys can feel free to use these all you want. I will be periodically giving you lots of entourage, so hopefully that makes you happy. The cutout tree, duplicate that over. You can start, if you get ahead, just iterating this across the site in perspective. Ladies leaning down to kiss their kids, really good for the foreground. You need to put people in your foreground that don't always get in the way of your scene and what you're trying to talk about. So people bending over to take a picture and stuff like that, awesome. Her hair could totally be cut out better. That's pretty awful. I got this one online, so. Yeah, she's pretty poorly cut out. But for our purposes today, it doesn't matter. This guy, he's getting a number. So we're going to tell a story here. He just got a phone number from a lady. This lady, she's going to give him her phone number. So it's always good to tell a story. They're on vacation. They're in Morocco. And these people, they're just tourists hanging out. So we're going to duplicate them over. Last but not least, we need to talk about the programming of the area. And so I've given you some really wonderful people sitting in chairs. Everybody needs that. So there again, I'm just using my duplication technique. So now, take a second, give everybody a couple minutes to just throw a composition together. I use the transform controls. Everybody should know this, but you hold shift. That constrains the proportions. Please do think about perspective. You've all taken hand rendering, so everybody has a good idea about how to think about perspective lines. My foreground leaves are really quite dark, so I'm going to go Command D, brighten those up. Just so everybody knows that, that is under Image, Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast. It's the first one. All of these under Adjustments, under Image Adjustments is where you get to your not your transform controls, your image adjustment controls. Very original name there. Let's get this to scale in the background. Anybody have any questions? It's okay to distort the trees in the back because they're just really there to hold the edge. I'll throw my lady with the kid up front. Always look at the scene around. Look at doors and windows when you're trying to get the heights of things, the perspective of things. When we're going over modeling, one of the most important things to address is really where your camera height is. There's nothing more annoying in the world than when you think that your camera is exactly at like eye level at 5 foot height, and it's not, it's skewed, and so across the scene, like everybody's kind of got to be rising in perspective and everything's really wonky. So this one was set up accordingly. So you can assume that one line across at the 5 foot level should be appropriate. So I could drop my guideline and assume that that is an appropriate height for people. Alrighty. So they're all happy. Got my tree in here. Let's copy the tree. Bam.
So pretty.
I know, it's such a happy. So one quick technique. I selected all 3 trees. I need to put them on the other side. I don't want to duplicate that all the time. They're already sort of in perspective, which is nice. I click on them all. I can go now to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. It just flips them for me really nicely. You could do that a million different ways. Flatten them out a little bit there. Alrighty. Our composition is essentially set. We're happy with it. It's always tweaking. These trees could be reordered. There's a million different things we can do to make this better. But probably the most important thing to do to make them better would be to add shadows. Nothing grounds an image like a shadow. That's what my grandfather told me, and I'm sticking to it. So, do we have a light source here? Not really. The model was just done with an ambient light, so you got these nice soft lighting effects, but the sun doesn't actually come from anywhere. And so in this instance, you get to pick what looks best. So take that into consideration, you know, where the shadow for the trees is going to be cast, how you really want to deal with that, the shadows of these people, etc. So I'm just going to do something that's sort of maybe off and to the right. That would ground the image quite nicely. So the way I am going to do that, because it's a lot faster than any other way, is to use an action script. So does everybody, well, Everybody knows how to make a shadow? Should we review that? I mean, we will review that just by the virtue of going through the action script steps. But by all means, if you really want to know the intricacies of doing a proper cast lit shadow, don't hesitate to ask. I would be happy to give a lecture on that, since it is quite important. So, action scripts. So action scripts, they just record exactly what you do. And then you can hit a button and it redoes everything you just did. So, for instance, I could create an action script right now. I'm going to apply this mask really quick. Okay. I could click on this lady, and I'm going to go Window, Actions. Sometimes it's a key over here, sometimes not, but the best way to get to it is always Window and then make sure Actions are clicked. You've got a lot of these in here. I already have a bunch set up for different types of shadows, shadows that go to the right. One of the most important shadows to set up is like a night shadow, because at night when the light is shining down on you, you've got like shadows going every different direction, and I don't want to do that every single time for every single person. That would take forever, so I set up an action for that. But you have lots of default actions in here. Vignetting, creating a frame, a wood frame, you know, all of these kind of crazy different things. And so you can play with them. You know, you can go in here and I could click sepia toning and click her and see what happens. Oh, wait, that just did it to the entire image. So that's the action. The action was to affect the entire image. And now I have to go back. Okay. I can undo out of an action. It is of note that when you're undoing out of an action, if it's 10 steps long, you're going to have to undo 10 times because it doesn't just take you back one step. Luckily, the sepia toning action I just clicked was only like 2 steps. So, back to making a shadow. Just as with creating a new layer, at the bottom, you can click this little new action button, create a new action, hovers, pops up. I'll call it shadow for class. Okay. As soon as I hit record, it starts to record. It's very important that I have selected the lady already, okay? Because otherwise, if I hadn't selected the lady, if nothing was selected, and then I selected the lady, your action would start by selecting her, by selecting cutout group, whatever she's named, cutout groups. Yes?
Can you think of a reason why when I select create new action, it doesn't actually...
When you select what?
Create new action.
Create a new action? It doesn't do anything? Okay, excellent. You're welcome. So my lady is selected, that's good. So my action is starting just exactly where I'm at right now. And so the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate her. As you would do, you just essentially go through the steps of creating a shadow. So I duplicate her, hit OK. I'm going to hold my command button to transform. You can also go edit, transform, distort is the same button that I just essentially used. But I just hold the command, it's a lot quicker. I can grab one of these and it just distorts it down. So I can cast her in a certain direction, hit OK. It sets that. And as you see this, that shadow is actually saving everything I'm doing. The angle that I do it at, every element to it. Now I'm going to hit Command U, which pulls up the hue saturation, also found under Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. I drop my lightness all the way down to black, hit OK. Lots of ways to do that. Now I'm going to set my opacity to 33. Okay, 33 is a little too light. I'm going to set it to 37. That looks good. The action itself actually just, I think, saved both of those steps, the 33% and the 37%. I hit return, it saves it, and, you know, honestly, I feel pretty okay with that. You know, that's the extent of pretty much where you want to leave an action script for a shadow. I could add a gradient. I could do lots of little nuanced things, but since I want to apply this to just so many weird and random things like trees and people sitting at tables, the parameters set up by the action might respond negatively if I added a gradient. Because if I add a gradient to her, that gradient will be measured over this distance. It will say that you know, this is X pixels tall, let's say it's 200, and I set a gradient, it would say that gradient's for 50 pixels. Well, then if I apply it to these guys, well, this is so much smaller that that gradient for 50 pixels would get rid of the entire shadow. So you have to think about the parameters that they are based. If you were a computer whiz, you can write specific scripts for all of this, which you can go online and figure out, and it's actually really awesome. It's a great way to do things, and they have lots of different WYSIWYG technologies for writing scripts now, which is what you see is what you get, is what WYSIWYG means. So if you're really interested by actions and scripts, there's a whole different world out there. So I hit, now it's very important to go back up to my actions and hit the stop. As you can see, the red is working because I'm still recording. Hit stop, bam, I'm happy. So what do I have? I have my old lady here, which was called cutout groups, and I have my new layer, which is called cutout groups copy. Just by default, of course, I created a copy. It just adds the word copy. You can get rid of that too under preferences, but I don't mind it. And so I'm happy with that. So here's my shadow for class. I can twirl it up, twirl it down. I can go through all of these. I can see what my settings were. My preset has all of these different settings in here associated with it. Now, I want to go back and I want to use that. That's the whole point of it. Click on my guy here. I'm just going to name him. He's now layer 1, but I'm going to call him guy 1. Actually, I'm going to call him Jim. He looks like a Jim. And so with Jim selected, as with the last time, we want our layer selected. We go, we hit shadow for class, just select it, and then we hit play. Okay. So pop the shadow down. As you see, it's not perfect. It didn't really associate it perfectly with him because those parameters were exactly set up for this image up here. So you still have to do a little bit of tweaking, but nevertheless, it's a lot easier. I can just hold Command, and with my black tool, kind of warp that over. Command with my black direct select tool, warp that over. And I'm feeling pretty happy that I have a shadow in 2 clicks. So.
It's pretty common then to tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, always common. There again with.
What's nice though is that it comes in at the same angle for all of them, so. Rather than having to set the angle every time, you at least have a good, way of.
And realistically, you want to tweak them every time anyway, because the sun would move across the view a little bit different. You know, if you have a light source, somebody standing there, their shadow would be sort of cast at slightly different angles if you want to get like really realistic about it, which we do. There is something else of note that I think is really interesting. So say I'm just going to get rid of this lady's shadow for the heck of it, and I'm going to recast her shadow. Does everybody know what this like weird annoying arrow in the middle is? Sometimes you grab it and it always pulls it off somewhere. It's, what's that?
I've always wondered what that does.
What it does is it is what controls the rotation and the transform. Yeah, it's sort of the center point. So like now I think if I rotate, it's rotating about that center point. Why I bring this up is because it's actually quite handy for doing shadows sometimes. If you have a very complicated thing, you can always move it over to the bottom of the foot, and I could like then place that right with her foot. And now whatever transforms I do, it's going to be pinned to that foot. See how that's working? Whereas otherwise, if I transformed, it might pull it away from her foot, the shadow. So you can always sort of pin your transforms to one spot. That's all. That's very good. Ooh, that reminds me of another really great transform. Speaking of pinning, this is an aside, but does everybody know the puppet warp? Does anybody know the puppet warp? Nobody knows the puppet warp? Gosh. Okay, well, the puppet warp, I feel like we got to open somebody, just a lady, just to do the puppet. Let's do the guy phone. I'm just going to open him up on his own and do a little puppet warping. Okay, so it is under image. I think it's under transforms. Yeah, it's a special little guy right above transform, puppet warp. Now, puppet warp is kind of like warp. It's kind of like distortion. It's all of these things. but instead of just creating one big rectangle to work off of, the Puppet Warp gives you a mesh, as you can see, all over the place. And you can control that mesh up on the top. So the density could be fewer points, more points. So fewer points, that'll work for us. We don't need so many points. Expansion pixels. So you can really, you know, you can show the mesh, you can get rid of the mesh, whatever. It shows you the depth of how you can treat it. And all the way it works is when I click around here, when I'm clicking, I'm putting pins at places. So I put a pin in his arm, and this is just like that control point. These points will not move. You can grab them and pull them. But the idea here is that it's kind of like a puppet. And so I can put him on his thing here, and now I can move that, and it all works, like swings. And those points are all held in place. So I could put it as hips, and whee! But, you know, look, he's skipping. Yeah, exactly.
This is great for doing like landscape, like topography and stuff like that too, because it, rather than warp where you're trying to like pull to make a hill, this is a way of doing that as well.
Well, because for
Or you
example,
can play with people.
say I wanted to warp his legs that same way. Well, back in the day, what I might have done is I would have taken my lasso and I would have selected one of the legs. If I make a selection of the one leg and then I go Shift Command W to get my warp, edit, transform, warp. Now I've given myself the option to warp just this area because I previously made a selection. So just so anybody knows, on a layer, you can always make a selection, do a transform, and then it just gives you the area. Well, if I warped his leg now, well, I could still kind of warp it, and I could use my handles the old school way. But one issue is, as I do it, it separates it from his leg. So by using the Puppet Warp, you don't have to worry about that. Ooh, and this reminds me of another great thing. Probably my 21st favorite Photoshop technique would be under Filter. And somebody else developed this. Anytime you see something like filter up here and vanishing point and lens correction, somebody else developed these and then Photoshop bought them out. So go to Liquify. Liquify is really swell. Anybody know Liquify? I saw a nodding of head. You know Liquify? It's sweet. It's kind of it's a similar dialog box to the background eraser tool. So we've got a crosshair in the center, and then we have a brush size. So I can make it bigger or smaller. And keep in mind now, whatever is within that circle is what is going to be liquefied. And in a way, that's like warping. But it doesn't distort it. So here, I could give him some big shoulders. You know, here's how you can really get that, you know, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas kind of looks, you know, like kind of crazy. But this can be quite handy on landscape because maybe I'll bring in the image that I did it to recently. There was this sort of a path and a fence, and I just wanted to move the dang fence over. And so by using this tool, I could make a really big brush and just kind of like nudge it over, and it brought with it everything else. So I didn't have to like cut the fence out, move it over, and then clone stamp all the gravel back to the other area. In one quick loop, I was able to kind of move everything. So you can see how Liquify is better than Warp in a lot of ways, because it allows you to just nuance things. You can also do really painterly effects with it without having to use smudge. And if anybody uses smudge, I don't use smudge very much, but every once in a while it's handy. So, okay, there are a couple of asides, but very handy tools. So, since this shadow, well, okay, let's pretend like I just went through and added shadows to everything. Since this shadow's in the front, I'm just going to give it a little bit of extra love and attention. And so to do that, I'm going to add just a hair of a gradient. The way I do that would be by adding a layer mask and using a slight gradient, and then touching things up. So add a layer mask by clicking on this little button down here. Layer masks are just amazing. They make my life so happy and help me sleep at night. So many things. So what a layer mask does, if anybody doesn't know, is all I've done is add this white. Because as I said before, white means you can see it, black means you can't see it. So I can see it all. It's all white now. It's also linked to the image. So anything that I do to the image is going to, like if I warped the image, well, it'll warp the layer mask later when we're working with it. You can, it's quite intelligent to unlink those at times, especially when you're working in plan graphics and trying to utilize masks. So, but for an image, we're just going to use it. So now I want to look down at my black and white guys, which I can switch back and forth by hitting the X button. Very handy, especially when you're doing this. And say I've got a painted bucket right now. Say I painted it black. Well, now it just disappeared because everything's black. That's not good. We didn't want that. So I'm going to go back to my paint bucket and switch to the gradient tool. My gradient, it's important to note, is black to white. And so if I drag black to white, well, it's not going to do what I wanted. It's getting rid of the opposite side. And so I want to drag the opposite way. I'm going to come out here. I'm going to assume that that's about the black point and just give it a soft little gradient on the top. Now, most of you might have grabbed the eraser tool to do that, but that would have been destructive, and if you didn't like it, it wouldn't have been very good. Now I can always tweak that. I could make it a little bit lighter. I could use the brush now. I could switch over to the brush by hitting B. I could look at my brush size, something with a nice softness up here, and I could come down, and since I'm painting black, it would get rid of it. Make it small, kind of soften up these edges. I have a very low flow right now at 40% and an opacity of 48. And this is too much, but you get the picture. Masks are wonderful. Alrighty, so everybody's happy. I'm going to add a shadow to these people. It's kind of wonky, but.
Is there a way to add more than one gradient to an object?
More than one gradient to an object. Yes, I mean, by using masks, you could add another layer mask. I would just add a second layer mask. Usually I would just get in with a brush and tweak it. But yes, you can add, I mean, I could add, I believe, another layer mask just like that. And throw another gradient on. See, I just added a secondary mask. You can mask it up all you want, which masks are great. Alrighty, so that's on there. Before we leave shadows, I want to address one more sort of shadow note. People cast shadows all the time in unrealistic ways because they get shadow happy. And I would hit on this tree, and I would hit shadow, and I would go bam, and that's a horrible shadow. Is that how the shadow would be cast on that? Not at all. So I'm going to drop that down. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of these tourist people because they're in my way. And so let's just talk about this shadow for a brief second. Let's get it down to a nice spot, something that's a little bit more realistic. And then the quickest and best way to do this is just make a selection. Make a selection for the area because we know it's going to tweak up. And I don't want to go through a bunch of steps. This is in the distance, but I'm going to hit L to get lasso, and I'm going to get my just regular polygonal lasso to create a line. I'm going to go across this base where that wall is. Make a selection for where the wall is. Now, just as I was showing before with the warp, because I've selected that, this is the only area that's going to change it. If I hit V, it's going to get me back to my transform controls. And I could have gone to Edit, Transform, Distort. And I'm just going to pull it over here. And while it's all still selected, just warp it back so that the base matches up. And make it tall again. Try to make it cast appropriately on that wall so that it doesn't look like a bad, ugly shadow. So we like happy shadows. I'm going to turn into Bob Ross. Okay, so you get the picture. It's not perfect, but that's the idea. Just quick little transforms really make your life, well, maybe not better, but make you a better person. Alrighty, what was my next step? Okay, I said all of that jazz. So, overall, this image is quite dingy, not very exciting. I mean, shader light was fine. They did an okay job, but really, I need to get a little more excitement in this image. So, first and foremost, I'm just going to add a brightness and contrast layer to this, the entire image. So, go up to Layer, New Fill Layer, or I'm sorry, New Adjustment Layer, Brightness and Contrast. What this does is adds that brightness and contrast to the entire image. What was that?
Is there a difference between going to the file menu or going to the bottom of your layers palette or
I don't think so. I don't imagine that that would change anything. Yeah. And now, I am not sure, but I know in CS6 you can apply just a brightness and contrast to the layer below it. And I thought in CS5 you could, but I've been working in CS6 so much lately, and you guys probably all do. But there should be a little tab right in this area that would apply the brightness and contrast just to the next layer. So that's a very handy thing. So you're doing non-editing. Instead of like opening up your layer and adding brightness and contrast and then having to live with that, you can just apply it to as an adjustment that you can always kind of re-edit, which is important. So, alrighty, so it's a little bit brighter, it's a little bit better, I like it, happy with it. And now we're gonna go through a variety of different fun techniques to liven up your image. So, let's first of all try adding some grunge. So go to your file, your in-class file, and open up, for the heck of it, let's just open up all of the textures. There should be 4 of them. So I just shift, select them all, right click, open with Photoshop. The other nice thing I like about, I guess it applies for placing an image, but I always just like opening up the image on its own just to sort of see it and analyze it. I can quickly look at the image size and see if it's going to be too small or too big. I can always do those little tweaks. And then when I bring it over, it's always a good option for me to name it. You know, so I can write grunge. It's just my workflow, but it works for me. I'm going to close that out and just go back to my base. At this time, since I haven't saved, I recognize I haven't saved because when I was clicking duplicate, it said to the base JPEG. That's not good, so let's just quickly save. Just call it base.psd. Happy with that. Now, since this is a texture that's going to be sort of atmospherically applied to the entire thing, it really doesn't matter that the grunge resolution is smaller than the image. It really doesn't bother me at all. So I'm going to place this in the upper left-hand corner and drag it across the entirety of the image. It is placed first out of everything. And now let's go through and just you can mess with the different layer modes and blending modes. I would set the blending mode to overlay and then adjust the opacity to just kind of get to different settings, just to see how it looks. So go to blending mode, slide down to overlay, and adjust the opacity accordingly. And you can actually see a really nice effect being applied. Here's where it's really also quite beneficial that you set up a brightness and contrast, because the overlay and the different blending modes oftentimes play off of those differences in color. And so they make those pop a lot more. So it's definitely of note to go back and check the brightness and contrast and play around with these things. Sometimes these last steps can be the most exciting part of your rendering.
And it's nice to dirty up, especially like your pavement, just because you're never going to have perfectly clean pavement. So that always like sticks out the most if you export a model from SketchUp or Rhino, just dirtying that up a little bit. So having that grunge layer, even if you only apply it to your pavement, really helps a lot.
Yeah, and here's, I think, a couple of precedents for images. I believe these guys are out of Portugal that I saw that obviously use a really nice grunge technique. And these are really simple renderings. You know, these are pretty bland, but by virtue of the technique, have a lot more character and quality to them. Ties the whole image together. The skies feel more dynamic. And as you're saying, the pavement, like they don't really have a pavement on here. I mean, they don't have any gravel. You know, those walls are probably just white coming out of the modeling machine. But all of a sudden, they give it a character. Your brain works in such mysterious ways. Was it in a class recently? I remember somebody talking about looking at a painting. And they looked at this painting, and they saw like a crowd off in the distance in the painting. And they walked up, and they looked at it. It was just dots of color. You know, your brain will figure things out if you give it an excuse. And so in this same sort of way, if you give somebody the excuse of thinking that, oh, that's poured stamped concrete, they'll usually go to something they like. That's the good thing, especially your professors. And so you can let them sort of believe whatever they think it is and be happy.
Out of Portugal.
I can find out. Yeah, it's a firm out of Portugal. They do very beautiful stuff. So grunge, that's grunge, kind of cool. Let's go to, let's see what I did next. We've got canvas. You can try an overlay of the canvas, 56%. Copy that over. So you obviously can have all these textures. I use lots of different ones. Here again, overlay, 56%. It's a little more obvious, but also quite interesting. And then to finish off, what I'm going to use is the grunge overlay and the silk linear light, 27%. What's that? And the silk is my favorite. I think that's what you're saying. Yes. I love the silk. Oops. This one does impart color. It's a really important thing that when you add a texture like this, that you check the printing, because it can look great on your computer. And then you print it and everything looks green or everything looks yellow. And that's not good. So that's my final one. Here again, I'm imparting this kind of insinuation that there's more going on with that silk layer. You can warp it, actually. You can use those lighting effects within the overlay and really make a big difference. To finish the image off, I'm going to do two more things. Here again, using layer masks as a big tool. We're going to add a vignette and add a soft glow to it, and then change that soft glow via the layer mask. So vignette, I use vignettes not usually as a vignette of black. We think of a vignette as being blackening out the edges, and that's how we'll do it, but I'll just briefly address the benefits of doing it in white. So to create that vignette effect, I'm going to go layer, new fill layer, solid color, OK. I'm going to select my color as black. I hit OK. There's lots of different ways to do this. I have it set up on my computer that when I add a new fill layer, it automatically adds a layer mask. As we see, the layer mask is white, so everything shines through. I'm going to drop the opacity down slightly, and then I'm going to choose brush by hitting B. I have to make sure my computer's angry because I haven't selected the layer mask itself. I can't paint my fill layer, it's just a color. And so I have to select my layer mask there. And make my brush larger by using the bracket and paint with white. Or I'm sorry, actually paint with black to make it erase away. So I hit the X button to bounce between my black and white. I can change my flow and opacity way up more because, frankly, I don't need it to be so light. And just kind of work it until it's at a nice effect. Vignettes really help to concentrate the image. It really focuses the eye. It gets rid of things that you don't want to see. If you're using a base image from a site, an existing site image, you don't need to see what's real, necessarily what's real. And so it can very much help to get rid of that. In this instance, because I've also done a fill layer, a color, I could test some other ones. I could try white. I could see, oh, how does that look if I did white edges? So how do I do that? I just double-click on the color. It pulls up the color picker. Heck, I could try what would a red vignette seem like. Well, that's really creepy. But I'm going to go with white. Green, you name it. We get really crazy. Something in the gray vein. Alrighty, I like that. Now, last but not least, I am going to select everything. So actually, let's go Edit, Select All. Well, the way I would do it is by clicking the bottom one, clicking the top one, and then just duplicating. Shift, Command, D, duplicate. I've duplicated everything. I'm going to right-click while they're all selected and merge those layers. This is the way I do this. There are other techniques. You can just add a blur layer. But what we're going to do is now add a filter blur, Gaussian blur. So you go filter, scroll down to blur, Gaussian blur, to this. We're going to be getting rid of a majority of it, so it doesn't really matter necessarily what your setting is on the blur, but something in the 10 to 6 realm I think is a nice setting. I'm going to, and so I've just blurred the entire image is the idea. And I'm going to drop my opacity down a little bit so I can see through enough and add a layer mask. Everybody get that? So I just dropped the opacity down on my complete blur so I can start to see through things. And I added a layer mask. Why did I add a layer mask? Because I don't want to see that blur effect everywhere. So I choose a brush, and I'm going to paint black to get rid of the blur. I'm going to increase my opacity on my brush so I can really see through it. Let's go 70%. And this is where you can be more selective. You can use your brush to get a little smaller. And I want to see these people a little bit better. Maybe these trees don't matter, but I'm just going to kind of go across the site and sort of massage it in the places where I want to see detail. And this also really helps to focus the image.
What was the shortcut for brush size?
The brush size is the brackets.
Or did you just do the shortcut for?
Oh, for the brush, just to get the brush is B, the letter B.
Didn't you just change the size by using the hotkeys?
Yeah, by changing the
Brackets.
size,
Oh,
use
oh,
the
it's
brackets.
oh.
Yeah, the brackets, the square brackets, make the brush go bigger and smaller.
Oh.
Hugely important. Yes?
I was going to say, when you merge all the layers into the merge visible,
Uh-huh.
instead of selecting all, if you have like a 200 layer thing, you just do Alt,
Yeah.
and then click on the little box up by the layers, the little drop down box above the opacity,
Uh-huh.
and then merge visible.
Oh, okay.
Shift Command E.
Merge
You
visible.
don't have to worry about it. It's just 2 clicks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you can also just add a blur layer too. That's probably a much better way to do it. You can go layer, new adjustment layer. No, I'll figure that out. There's a way to just add a blur layer too. But this is the technique I use. Why? Because actually I use it for other filters. Say I added you could, instead of adding a blur to this, you could have added a watercolor effect. You can add, cross strokes. You can add any of these different things and then have it be your first layer, add a layer mask, and then kind of touch it up and let that effect shine through wherever you want it to shine through. And the other great thing about that is that it makes you think about your composition there at the end, because it makes you kind of step back and say, okay, how does this look? Another really valuable thing to always check yourself against an image, because you've been staring at this so much in the computer, is flip the whole thing. You wouldn't believe how differently it looks, and all of a sudden you spot things that you didn't see before because you save down a version, save it down to JPEG, and just reverse the whole thing and see how it looks. So there's our final composition. These people are happy and on vacation in Morocco. We take a 5-minute break, and we'll talk about collages, and I'll talk a little bit more about entourage. Any questions? Sue, you can hit up questions, right? Right now it's a good time.